Hey, here's a question for you all. Was William Shakespeare a GIS person? King Henry IV, Part 1, Act 3. Lord Mortimer and Cousin Glendower. Will you sit down? And Uncle Worcester or Worcester. A plague upon it. I have forgot the map. I have forgot the map. I looked at that and said, Shakespeare must have truly, deep down, loved maps. All right, here are some of my favorite geospatial, geography, GIS books. Feel free to put this in the chat box in our closing sort of 14 minutes here, what your favorites are. I told you I read earlier this year the Isaac Newton book. I also read this book here, The Demon of Unrest, which is about Fort Sumter, history and geography, 6-month period. The Age of Islands, I read last year from Alistair Bonnet, and that was fascinating. Phil Brick's In the Eye of the Hurricane, which is actually about the Yorktown 1783 battles. Fascinating. Around the World in 80 Trains. That was great from Monisha Rajesh. Yeah, that was interesting. Her journey around the world. She even went to North Korea on a train. Fascinating. And the Atlas of Extinct Countries I read more recently. That was fascinating book. That was fascinating as well. Probably many of you have read this one, Longitude. That's oftentimes cited, and that's one of my favorites as well. But I also like The Mapmaker's Wife, which is about the 1730 survey of Ecuador when the French surveyors were down there trying to figure out whether the Earth was an oblate spheroid or a prolate spheroid. Was it egg-shaped or rounder around this way? Turned out to be an oblate spheroid. But they were measuring, and the fascinating thing was that they encountered, of course, all sorts of obstacles, but they were very exacting. These old surveyors, you got to hand it to them. We've got to measure this very accurately, etc. So that is The Mapmaker's Wife. I also really like anything by Simon Winchester, The Map That Changed the World, which is about the world's first geologic map of England and Wales in 1810. And it's a classic story, too, about, the establishment sort of looking down on Smith, who was a canal digger. But Smith noticed stratigraphy, layers that nobody else had noticed. And that was revolutionary. And for a while, it was discounted by, again, the powers that be at the time, 1810. But then they realized, hey, you know what? From this map that Smith has labored 20 years to make, this geologic map, we can find out where all the coal is. So right at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So it's a fascinating story in a sort of social sense, but also his vision, seeing what nobody else saw, which is what I love about spatial thinkers, including you all. You are making a positive difference in our world using GIS. And I had the good pleasure of meeting Andrea Wolfs, who wrote the biography of Alexander von Humboldt. She was at the ESRI user conference, and I was actually backstage that year with a bunch of wonderful students from a high school. And I said, Andrea, I'm a big fan of your work. I didn't want to. I felt like a groupie. Was right there backstage, right before she went on stage. So I didn't pester her too much, but I hope. But that's a fascinating book. Von Humboldt. Oh my gosh, Venezuela mapping, went to Siberia. Oh, gracious. And I'm rather fond of this one. I wrote this one called Interpreting Our World. It's about the revolutionary nature of geography and the revolutionary people that saw things that maybe nobody else could see in quite that way. So there's technology in there, the invention of GIS, GPS, mapping techniques, but there's also ways of thinking and other things that you might enjoy. It's one of those things that it's not overly academic. You could give it to, again, a student that you know that's outside of this field. You'd give it to a loved one, a family member, etc. I've got a couple of favorite data sets. I know this again sounds kind of nerdy, but I still really like the Starbucks distribution map because it's symbolized as a heat map, and so you can really see the distribution of these things and think about the whys of where and why they're clustered the way they are and why there are certain densities. In this case, Midtown Manhattan versus, hey, what about Kearney, Nebraska? What's my hypothesis? There's one. According to this data, we always have to say, according to the data set that's behind the map. We can't just say, oh, that is the truth. Always have a critical sense of who created the data. How often is it updated? What scale was it created at? Especially in these days that everybody is a map maker, including you, including your students, including your colleagues, your family members. Anybody can put content up there with an account in, for example, ArcGIS Online. So be critical of the data, which is the whole reason why my colleague Jill Clark and I started this. I know this sounds super boring. Oh, Joseph, the Spatial Reserves data blog. It's all about three things. Where can I find spatial data? How do I know if it's any good? Can I trust it? And then societal issues like copyright, location privacy, ethics, etc. So the Spatial Reserves data blog and book, and I'm going to put that in the chat box right now. Okay. So those are a few of my favorite data sets and maps. I'm going to just lay out this for you to chew on. This may not be your list. You may say, hey, Joseph, you're forgetting about this one or that one. But I would submit that there are five forces bringing us to a really pivotal time in geospatial technology. First of all, geo-awareness. People are aware of issues that you and I, as the geo-enviro community, have cared about for a long time. They care about natural hazards, population change, coastal erosion, urbanization, etc., energy, all the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. People are aware of those. They don't always connect it to geospatial technology and education, but at least the awareness is at an all-time high, which I think is a great opportunity for us as a community. And secondly, people are enabled to use at least some geospatial technology. They may not think about it in their everyday lives, but they have a fitness app. They track a package. They go on FlightAware and figure out when a loved one is coming into the airport, etc. Right? They are enabled to use at least some of these tools. The geotechnologies having evolved into this cloud-based modern GIS environment is a huge leap forward. Many of us, again, on the call, remember the desktop-only days. Now, there's still software that you can install on the desktop computer or on a server. It's connected ideally to the cloud, but you can install it. It has a lot of functionality. It is a day-to-day workhorse for many, many people, millions of people around the world. For example, ArcGIS Pro. But ArcGIS Online and other SaaS-based, software as a service-based tools, I wouldn't have been able to map that litter in the instant that I did with you all, or use the Living Atlas apps. That's all cloud-based GIS. It's really revolutionizing not just GIS, of course, but many other sectors of society and technologies. But it's great that you have. Remember when the first time you made something in Dropbox or Box.com or OneDrive or Google Drive, and you could share it with a colleague and you both work on a paper? That was revolutionary, wasn't it? It was like, wow, I don't have to email this. I don't have to put it on disk. You've got your music in the cloud too. Wasn't that great when you can get ABBA's greatest hits online? ABBA was a band. Okay. And the point is, that was great. But geotechnologies, mapping in the cloud is even more powerful because we want to collaborate, right? We want to solve problems across physical boundaries, across watersheds, biomes, across political boundaries, states, counties, countries, across disciplinary boundaries also, I would submit, across economics, physics, mathematics, geography, city planning, health, right? Across disciplinary boundaries too. So that's what's important about geotechnologies in the cloud. It allows us to collaborate in new and exciting ways. Citizen science with my walkability map, that was an example of citizen science or community science or crowdsourcing, whatever phrase you want to use for it. Another one is iNaturalist. We've got the iNaturalist observation community using that tool and then mapping the results. And finally, storytelling is another force. This whole thing is a story map, as you can see in the URL, storymaps.arcgis.com. It's a story map because I'm telling a story. I have a lot of maps inside of it. So that's a very effective way of telling the story here. You could use it as well. There are over 4 million story maps. It shows the popularity of maps as storytelling tools. And here's some trends. Again, you might not agree with this. It could be like your list of 5 cool places to visit in Colorado, my state, before you die. The 5 coolest bands of all time. These are debatable, okay? But I would just submit these trends are at least something to think about. And I'd love to hear your comments in the chat box or after the session tonight. 3D, we have a 3D world. It makes sense that we've got 3D analytics. We've had 3D visualizations for many years, but now we've got 3D analytical tools. The joining, or at least the touching, of BIM, CAD, and architecture, engineering, and construction, computer-aided drafting and design, building information management, the interior space people mapping, and the exterior space people mapping. For years, they were sort of speaking like Spanish, and we were speaking sort of like Portuguese. We could understand a few words in common, but we didn't really have interoperable tools. And when you think about, I'm going to create a resiliency plan for a university campus, or for a major medical center, or for my community, I've got to have the interior spaces, at least the public buildings, mapped so I know where the emergency shelters are, I know where the exits are, et cetera, and the exterior spaces in one seamless environment. Sports stadium is another example, right? The point is, those tools are now available. We've got a partnership, Esri and Autodesk, for example, and that's brought lots of these tools to the fore. Real-time data, we talked about that. People wanting to be mapping things in real time. What are the frontiers in mapping? I've got another section on that, but since we're running sort of out of time, I'm going to mention them. It ranges from planetary mapping, mapping the surface of Mars, Ganymede, Io, Callisto, etc., the moon, and all the way to a very personal medical mapping, right? Mapping the human brain, human organs. So medical mapping to planetary. Those are some of the frontiers of mapping, but also mapping things as close to real time as possible is very, very uh, much at the forefront, right? When you think about all the things that we've gone through as a society just in the last few months, of major hurricanes, wildfires, et cetera. That's just one example of why people want to be able to map things now so we can get those emergency vehicles in there where we need to get them to get people lives are at stake. So enterprise and web GIS. I mentioned web GIS, but also people having enterprise systems that interoperate. And also, if they want to not share, we've talked a lot about sharing data, but if they have sensitive information, I mentioned I work with tribal governments, tribal sacred sites, medical, personal identifiable information, health records, and things like that, national security, and other things they want to be able to have on their own servers on their own premises. So that's a very viable part of GIS. And then finally, artificial intelligence and machine learning. We could have a whole webinar on that. In fact, I've taught several workshops this year, and you can take a look at one of them right here, a hands-on GIS GeoAI workshop on artificial intelligence. What I do in that workshop is extract features from imagery in an automated way, all the buildings, all the trees, all the ships, all the airplanes parked, etc. I have people create a survey like the walkability survey with an AI assistant. And I also have people use the business analyst web app to say, give me a bivariate map of median age and median income in Los Angeles County by census tract. Done. You don't even have to know where the tools are anymore. Still need this tool here. Your brain is still the most important tool. And that's what I hope to leave you with this evening. So those are some trends in GIS. And I've got a couple of new videos this year. One is a bit of a reflective piece of, is it all worth the effort? And you can tell me what you think of that, why this endeavor that you and I are embarked on, many for decades, some of you are brand new to this, why it actually works and why it actually is viable and important to our world. And I've got a geo inspiration column where I highlight people from all over the world making key differences in geospatial technology. All right, here is a couple of final thoughts for you all. This is, as some of you may know, you feel free to put it in the chat box, a Mac 2E, I think, or 2SE or something like that. And the point is, it's a doorstop now. I took it when I was running a geospatial technology club after school in an actual high school. My point here, though, is that the tools change. The software changes, the hardware changes. That wonderful set of tools that you have at your fingertips, folks, that, okay, maybe it's too heavy or too light to be a doorstop, but it's going to be a paperweight in the not too distant future. So this tool right here, keep that one growing. And that's why I'm so glad that you're part of this community and why you've chosen to join me this evening. All right, couple last Geo songs. He's in the cart lab now. He's in the cart lab now. He spends all his time or her time making polygons, points, and lines. She's in the cart lab now. In the cart lab now, I've got the full lyrics here on the story map. You heard it here first, folks. Ways to keep learning. I touched on that a moment ago. And I've also got a song here, Mr. Cardo. Mr. Cardo, why don't you come to your senses? Creating geofences for so long now. That was so bad. Okay, I better move on. But I truly believe that you folks are the positive change agents in the world. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy lives to join me for this GIS Day 25th anniversary live webinar. I hope it was fun. I hope it was interesting. Maybe you learned some new tools, some new techniques, some new data sets, some ways of learning and keeping moving forward that you didn't know before. And I'm going to close off the recording, but I'm going to hang around here for a little bit. If any of you want to ask me any questions in the chat box, feel free to do so. And I just wish you all the best. I'm going to be sailing off at 0400 tomorrow for Texas Tech University, the Llano Estacado. I'm looking forward to working with the faculty and the students out there. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, many of my colleagues and I will be at the AGU Science Conference in December. And then looking forward into next year, feel free to join us at the ESRI User Conference in July in San Diego. And my team also hosts the Education Summit that happens the weekend before the User Conference. There's lots of other events happening. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to go to any of these links. I'm going to put this one more time in the chat box and then close off the recording and wish you all a very spatial, safe, and wonderfully happy GIS day. Thanks, folks.